So I got to attend my 4th Sundance Film Festival, and I have a lot of thoughts on the 8 movies I have seen. And yeah, the title might say top 10 Sundance movies, I just need to do it for the clicks, okay? This is my 2nd time doing the fest virtually, because not only do you save a ton of money in terms of Airbnbs and plane tickets, but Sundance truly does an excellent job at giving film fans a ton of options to enjoy the festival from the comfort of their own home. Personally, I think the awards pass is the best bang for your buck, considering pretty much anything that wins an award won it for a reason, and a lot of the better movies from previous Sundance lineups often win something at least. Even though that's not always the case, you got a good shot at getting the better movies. So if you want to participate in the festival for a much cheaper way, I'd recommend hooking up with some friends next year and binging as many movies as you can over the weekend, because my group and I had an absolute blast doing that this year. Also, when it comes to talking about these movies, most of them don't even have a trailer at the moment, so there will be a lot of screenshots and interviews with my Park City footage playing in the background throughout most of this video, but I'll do my best job at painting the stories of all of these films without ever going into deep spoiler territory, because I know sometimes when I listen to festival footage, people give too many things away, and I hate being that guy, so I will go more in depth on some of these in the future when you get the chance to see them. So let's just cover every movie I saw in the order I watched them, starting with A Real Pain, the 2nd film written and directed by Jesse Eisenberg. I have not seen When You Finish Saving the World yet, so this was my first time seeing what he could do behind the camera, and I thought it was pretty good. This was probably the most talked about movie of the fest since it sold for $10 million to Searchlight Pictures, and it follows 2 cousins played by Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin as they go on a Holocaust tour in Poland to pay tribute to their grandmother who recently passed away. I chose this one for our group first because of how hyped up it was. I mean, if you check Letterboxd, I think most of the ratings speak for themselves, that people are absolutely falling in love with this movie. And I think that's because it does a solid job at giving the audience a little bit of everything you want in a movie. In terms of comedy, there are a lot of funny moments in here, specifically with how Culkin handles his character's interactions with a lot of the older members of the tour group, but at the same time, there is a lot of heart in that character, and the rest of the story as well. And I can easily see this bringing a lot of tears out of a lot of people, even if it didn't get there for me. Almost every single film I saw in this year's festival felt very personal and autobiographical to a degree, and this one is absolutely no exception. Before these virtual screenings start, the director will often come on and give a brief introduction about what you're about to watch, and Jesse mentioned how he got to film his grandmother's actual home in Poland, so if this isn't autobiographical, I don't really know what is. I think Eisenberg is clearly being very vulnerable here, and I think that's what makes this film as emotional as it is, but my biggest complaint is I think they could have gone even deeper here. By the time the story wraps up, I was kind of left feeling like, wait, that's it? As if there were 2 or 3 more powerful scenes away from making this one of the best films of the entire year for me, but I guess I'm alone in that department considering how many people already love this. So definitely keep it on your radar later on this year because it might end up being one of your favorites of 2024. Next up, I saw Daughters, which not only won the Audience Award for Best Documentary, but also the entire festival favorite award. It follows 4 different girls going through the Date with Dad program, which allows incarcerated fathers to go through 10 weeks of counseling, and if they pass, they earn a night where they can dress up and go to a formal in the jail where they are allowed to talk and dance with their daughters for 1 night. And I hate to reveal this so early in the video for you, but this is by far my favorite film from the entire festival. And honestly, I'd say it's one of the best I have seen at any Sundance I have attended in the past. And off the top of my head, I truly don't think I have ever cried this much watching anything in my entire life. The subject alone is something that is easy to make a documentary around because this is an incredible program to make people aware of, but it's the way Angela Patton and Natalie Ray choose to tell these men and girls stories that makes it as powerful as it is. The directors have said that this is not a prison documentary, and I think that is the perfect summary as to why it works. You get an inside look as to how hard it is not only for the families dealing with the absence of their father, but also how a single event like this can inspire men to change the entire trajectory of their lives. You never go into detail about why they are in jail, and the filmmaking never feels preachy at any point. I think a lot of documentaries like this tends to dump a lot of facts and say, this is why this thing is fucked up. But whenever Daughters gives you some of that information, they intertwine it naturally with an event happening within the story, making this feel like less of an educational documentary and more of just putting you in the moment of these people. I'm pretty lacking in my history of documentary filmmaking at the moment, so I'm sure this statement I'm about to make isn't the most educated out there for sure, but after sitting on this for 2 days, this might truly be the best documentary I have ever seen, and I don't think there is a single person on this planet who will dislike it. After I sobbed like a child through that, we turned on Little Death, which follows a depressed screenwriter played by David Schwimmer as he tries to get his passion project off of the ground. If you think that sounds pretty basic, trust me, this movie goes in a bunch of crazy directions, but I think if you are a fan of dark comedies, you should just go into this one as blind as you can. I'm a big fan of movies that split themselves up into 2 or 3 or 4 distinct sections like this one does, but I know that kind of storytelling isn't as cohesive for most people. It seems like this is the most divisive one we watched this year, and I fall more on the I had a good time with that movie side of things. I think it started off a little pretentious because I was like, really? We need another fucking movie about how hard it is to make your passion project in Hollywood? But I think when you look at that aspect of the story after finishing the whole thing, you kind of need that first half to contrast the environment that is explored later on in the film. I think the strongest element of the entire movie though is the comedy, because even though it wasn't the funniest thing I saw this year, it does have a lot of beats that hit for me. Whether that be an actual line of dialogue, especially with one 9/11 joke that they throw in here that had me cracking up so hard, but also just the physical appearance of some of the side characters that have some build up to their reveals later on. It's just perfect casting in my book, and if you haven't seen this yet, I know none of this makes sense right now, but you'll know exactly what I mean after you see it. My friend Jake said he heard somebody say 2 mid movies doesn't make a great movie, and I kind of agree with that, but I still had a good time with this one. Next up, we have a coming of age film called Suncoast, which I probably wouldn't have watched if I did 30 seconds of research and realized this comes out in select theaters later on this week, along with going straight to Hulu in only 2 weeks. But what can you do? This follows a teenager growing up in Clearwater, Florida, who is dealing with not only all of the awkward high school moments that come with that, but also her dying brother, who is checked into a hospice facility waiting to finally pass away. It is based off of director Laura Chin's actual life, and it just feels like a Sundance movie. And although I would usually mean that in a positive way with something like Coda, for example, I think this one is probably my least favorite of the festival. And I hate saying that because I do think this is a film that is filled with moments, and some of those moments are truly incredible. And I think anybody that watches this will feel every single one of those moments when they hit. But for every one of those incredible scenes, there are like 3 or 4 that made me cringe out of my seat. I think the main actress, Nico Parker, gives a great performance, but everybody else is just not on her level. Her mom is played by Laura Linney here, who has a couple of great scenes, but there's a part pretty early on where she starts imitating a screeching sound she hears, and I don't know how anybody involved in pre, post, or on-set production stopped that from happening, but somehow it made it into the final cut of the movie. All of the teenagers around Nico Parker are terrible in this, and I really don't know if I blame the writing for their characters or the actual performances. Honestly, in hindsight, it was probably both, but almost all of their scenes were painful for me to get through. And then Woody Harrelson is kind of just there the whole time. Like, by the end of the film, you are like, why the hell did we even put this character in here? It just feels so off course from everything else happening in the movie. It was probably just to attach a big name to the project because he just adds absolutely nothing to this entire experience for me. It was still my girlfriend Olivia's favorite of the entire lineup, and it seems like I am the only one online complaining about this one. So for anybody craving a coming of age movie, you can watch this on Hulu very soon. But for me, the best coming of age film of this year's Sundance was Didi, which follows a young teenager in the summer of 2008 as he tries to make friends, kiss a girl, and become a filmer for skate videos. If 8th grade and mid-90s had a baby, it would be this movie, because it has all of the awkwardness in the dialogue of 8th grade, but also that much more adult humor that 15-year-olds use in mid-90s. In Suncoast, the teenage dialogue felt like an adult telling kids what to say, whereas in here, it felt like kids being kids in that specific time period, which just so happens to be the exact time period I grew up in at this age. I laughed harder at this than any other movie I have seen in a long time, let alone in this lineup. And just like how mid-90s has a couple of emotional beats that really nail it, Didi's family dynamic is filled with just as many of those as there are comedic moments. The entire cast is perfect in this, with a perfect teenage performance from Isaac Wang. If you grew up around this time period like me, this feels like our Stranger Things, alright? Because it has so many callbacks to the late 2000s. In terms of narrative filmmaking, this was definitely my favorite of the festival, and although I gave it a 4 on Letterboxd, I could easily see this being a 4.5 or maybe even a 5 after a bunch of rewatches. So if this doesn't make my top 10 movies of 2024 list, we are in for an amazing year for filmmaking. Next up, we have In the Summers, a story that follows two sisters that takes place during 4 summers over the course of 2 decades as they visit their troubled father out in New Mexico. This actually won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance this year, and even though Didi took home the Audience Award, I still find that one to be the much stronger film compared to this one. I think the undeniable strongest part of this is Residente's performance, who plays the father. He is so good that at times it feels like you are watching a documentary. With how he looks and how he talks, you just feel like this is a real person. And I know the whole point of filmmaking is for an actor to come across as a real person, but I have to say this is one of the best performances I have seen in a long time. The sisters are played by multiple actors throughout the different summers, and I think every single one of them does an excellent job, with Sasha Calle and Leo Male being pretty great in the final act of the film, but I just feel like the script was 1 or 2 drafts away from making this great. There are things that really work about it, like there is a pool that is consistently shown throughout the 4 different chapters that presents how the father is feeling, and I wanted more moments or changes like that throughout the entire story. I feel like in a similar way to A Real Pain, it just feels like there are 2 or 3 scenes missing here, and hell, even if there was one brilliant scene, I would maybe feel a lot more positively about it, but at the end of the day, I feel like I won't be thinking about this one 6 months from now. And the Sundance Awards are kind of hit and miss, so this kind of makes sense why the grand jury would give it to something like this, and it seems like a lot more people are pretty positive on this one compared to me, so I guess be on the lookout for this one as well. So those were 6 movies we watched the first day, and then on day 2 we watched 2 movies. The first of that group being Girls Will Be Girls, which is yet another coming of age movie, which follows this superstar teenager who is the head prefect at her school, which takes place in the Himalayas as she goes through all the ups and downs of being a teenage girl. At times, this movie really works in that classic coming of age way. You got this girl trying to figure her life out, and she's got her first teenage love, but then it adds this weird, interesting element, I guess, where the girl's love interest is also kind of in a love triangle with her mom. It's like such a bizarre idea that I can't fully hate it, but at the same time, the entire experience just comes off a little bit too awkward for me. And although by the end of it, there are a lot of really good, heartfelt moments and the performances are good, it just feels way too long for me. Like, I swear to God, I watched the 6 movies the day before, and all of those combined felt shorter than finishing this movie. I know Didi is more for my specific demographic, and this is probably for somebody else's more specific demographic, but I also think something like Didi has way more energy in how it tells its story versus this one is just too dragged out. And I'm a big fan of slow movies. If you are a slow burn, I'm not gonna automatically jump on the hate train, but I just don't think there's enough payoff in this one for me to really recommend it to too many people. And then after that, we hopped into a completely different movie called Kneecap, which follows this Irish rap trio called Kneecap, where all 3 of these guys actually play themselves. It's a biopic that is kind of told in a Trainspotting-esque way, and it's not fully about how these guys started making music, even though that's totally covered, but more about how the impact of this Irish rap group inspired younger people to start wanting to speak the real Irish tongue again. This ended up being one of the bigger films of the festival, so we definitely had to check it out, and I gotta say, I enjoyed this one too. This group is not gonna end up on my Spotify Wrapped list, that's for damn sure. It's just not my kind of music. But that being said, I couldn't believe how good at acting these 3 main guys were. I knew nothing about this group, so the second I found out that they were actually playing themselves, I was genuinely shocked, because even when you look at them at the Q&A after the film, like, the way they talk, they don't seem like they would be that great at acting, but they blew me away with their performances here. I think a couple of the other films are funnier than this, but at the same time, there are a lot of killer lines and facial expressions in this movie as well. It's definitely not one you're gonna want to throw on for your mom, but it is one you could throw on with the boys and have quite a few laughs with. There's a line comparing them to the Beatles that completely cracked me up, and as somebody who's not completely familiar with this entire history of Ireland, it really does a good job at filling you in on all the gaps perhaps you might be missing. I wasn't completely blown away with it. Like, I think it's a solid movie. I don't think it elevates to much more than that for me, but I could also see this being a favorite for a lot of people out there. Like, I could totally see Kneecap showing up on a couple of random people's top 10 movies of the year list. It won't for mine, but I could totally see it being in the number 9 slot for somebody out there. So we'll see what Sony wants to do with it, but I would keep it on the radar for now if this sounds like something that would be up your alley. If we're ranking these from my favorite to my least favorite, I would put Daughters in the number 1 slot for sure. Didi in the number 2 slot for sure. 3 through 5 are pretty much on par with each other, but I'm gonna put A Real Pain at 3, Little Death at 4, and Kneecap at 5. I'm gonna put In the Summers at 6, and then the more I talked about Girls Will Be Girls and realized I had not much to say about it, I'm gonna put Suncoast at 7 and Girls Will Be Girls at 8. I promise I don't have a bias against the teenage girl movies. It's kind of just how things went this year, because if Lady Bird dropped at this Sundance, that would be in my number 1 spot for sure. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it as always. I love talking about Sundance. I love attending whenever I can. This was my first one attending in 3 years. Even though it was virtual, I just have a great time doing it. This is my social media here, so if you want to see me cover other films, maybe some other film festivals down the line, I would love to be able to share my thoughts on as many of them as possible. But you can follow my movie opinions on there. My Instagram and Twitter are here as well. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a like. You know, that helps the algorithm out a lot for me, and I'd really appreciate it. If you really like my opinions, you like the way I talk about movies, be sure to subscribe. This wasn't my best video in terms of footage and stuff because, like I said, there's not much to work with yet for these movies. But if you just like hearing me talk about movies, that's what we're here for. I love to hear your opinions, so be sure to comment down below what was your favorite film from this year's Sundance if you got to go. If you didn't get to go, what are some of the films you're most excited to see? There's a couple from the festival that I wasn't able to see that I'm really looking forward to, and I just love celebrating movies as much as I can. So thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I hope you have an awesome day. Thanks.